very warm welcome to Sustainable Organisation session. My name is, I'm based at Sussex, and I'm also a long-standing member across the STEPS Global Consortium partners. It goes back for the full 15 years of the STEPS Centre, in fact. So today it's really nice to have an opportunity on some of the diverse project experiences while we think of some priorities going forward. So what has STEPS really been doing all of this time? Well, broadly operating in dynamic problem spaces where neoliberal reordering and contested land use are often prominent. And we've been working across one or more of the following activity areas. First, unpacking the dynamics of dominant urban development trajectories, asking what policy options and interventions are prioritised, how and why, and assessing winners and losers. Alongside this, we've been aiming to increase appreciation of marginalised perspectives and possible alternative development pathways that may lead to more socially just environmental health and livelihood benefits across the rural-urban continuum. And in various ways and to various degrees, the teams have been engaging in attempts to help build these alternative pathways. For example, with people in places, helping to mobilise individual and collective agency, and supporting forms of citizen action, and more broadly, working towards building the legitimacy of marginalised knowledges and the reframing of debates across the wider knowledge system. And all of this often involves novel forms of alliance building. Whilst there's a plurality of approaches across the many projects, I just wanted to highlight a few features which are common to all of them. First, the teams try to work with people in places in ways that put experiential embedded knowledge from urban and peri-urban communities right at the heart of what we do. And I think in all cases, we've tried to shine a light on diverse framings and narratives and how contested narratives play out. We also recognise that human environment interactions are at their most intense in these kind of contexts. So across the natural, social and physical sciences, we try to reveal hidden or neglected interactions and innovations. So, for example, interactions between industrial and urban developments and water supply and quality, food systems, health and livelihoods, really trying to examine how they play out across scales and across interest groups. But engaging with policy and planning interventions for sustainability in these kind of liminal spaces in which we work involves a lot of additional challenges, such as grappling with the sorts of organised irresponsibility that evolves from fuzzy jurisdictional and legal boundaries, which might include, for example, lax environmental regulations and service provision exclusions. And ironically, there's also a need to grapple with the adverse implications of planning aspirations, which tend to be based on ideas of sharp distinctions between the rural and urban, the formal and the informal, and tradition and modernity. So thereby, established planning often misses really critical engagements with a dynamic rural-urban continuum, which is really full of innovation and possibilities that we're interested in. So urbanising and peri-urban contexts clearly present quite unique opportunities and challenges for transdisciplinary action research and researchers. But we also think they're particularly exciting as frontiers of sustainability transformation. This brings opportunities for rapid learning and widespread impact, but there's still a need for ongoing coordinated global efforts to draw this out. We're lucky to have a wonderful set of panelists today, all centrally involved in urban sustainability field research, working in India, Mexico, and China. We'll show the names and affiliations of all our panelists on the screen shortly. I hope Hallie's got a slide for you. And we'll provide more details, including links to relevant projects in a PDF file, and I'll share that on the chat in a moment. So in terms of running order today, Ritu Priya will remind us of the broad overarching questions that the panel have been thinking about in a moment. Then we'll hear from the panel through a facilitated discussion with Hallie Eakin. And during this part of the session, we're going to welcome contributions in the chat box from everyone on the call. And finally, Ramila Bisht and Bikram Choudhary will lead a brief review of these contributions, but what we will do is share the chats after the event and be in contact with you all. And I'll try and keep an eye on the timing so we can close before we're whisked back to the plenary session again. So over to you, Ritu.
Thanks, Fiona. I'm Ritupriya from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and been part of many of the STEPS projects that we've done collaboratively. I'll immediately take you into the three questions that we posed ourselves for this session. As Fiona has indicated, the complexity of issues was huge, urban sustainability, and we decided to just pick these so that we can have a pointed discussion. The first relates to what are the tools and approaches to transdisciplinary research that help to reveal framings and power dynamics, bring together formal and informal knowledges, and have potential to help democratize city-region planning processes. We worked across the three teams that she mentioned across the globe, and found a similarity of overall approach to the complexity of the problem space that broadly included two elements. One, the theory of change, which all teams saw as pertaining to long-term societal processes and therefore stepwise progression for enabling marginalized perspectives to inform thinking about present planning and future visions, generating enabling knowledge for mobilizing pro-poor collective action and visioning. And the second was foregrounding counter narratives to the mainstream, reconstructing the mainstream, analyzing it, and the counter narratives that came from communities on the ground with ecological and bottom-up narratives revealed through safe spaces for the marginalized and brought to the fore into policy discourse with diverse segments and actors to initiate and strengthen the pro-poor societal processes. In doing this, the three teams worked in somewhat diverse ways with a diverse definition of the problem space. Two focused on the peri-urban and urban agriculture and its related blue and green infrastructure, which led to addressing issues of multidimensional well-being, livelihoods, environmental and human health, and marginalized green infrastructures with voices into policy discourse. And the third team saw the problem space as urban governance and water systems for urban infrastructure planning. Enabling the marginal voices was attempted in very diverse ways at different level and scale. In Mexico, it was addressed as mobilizing individuals from the marginalized communities who were unable to question the dominant narrative and reframe their narratives for themselves, as well as revision the future and collectivize to make their voice heard. In Ghaziabad, in the national capital region of Delhi, where there was a situation of local environmental citizen activism and wide and varied framings, we interacted with the local activists and local communities to create dialogue and more sensitization to the pro-poor perspectives. And in the third kind of setting, there was more city-level public mobilization and dialogue with citizen administrators, with citizen science, with drainage, with undertaking of real-life experiments, and so on. The outcomes of the three were in consonance with the kind of efforts made and the kind of tools used, the levels at which interventions were made, and therefore mobilized community leadership building bridges between conflicting sections was the first. Interventions in policy discourse with civil society beginning to incorporate solutions of livelihoods of the poor. Citizen future scenario building and changing narratives and visions with disturbing questions and dilemmas of the citizens being foregrounded and demanding revisioning. The third brought in changing perceptions of the problem space among elite groups and the administrators with mobilization of the poor. Thus, across all these, in all of them, what we find is changes and achievements in terms of cognitive, normative, social, and material shifts in some of them. But across these, we see the kind of transformative potential in these efforts. The second question was about what have we learned about approaches to the role of transdisciplinary research in transformative alliance building. Question 3 was about the challenges and opportunities for embedding transdisciplinary research for urban sustainable transformations in university contexts. And in our experience, transdisciplinary research in universities is still in a fledgling state. it is being adopted on disciplinary and individual predilection of faculty members. And thereby, it's sort of interdisciplinary fields are able to take it on and in a more concerted way than others. And therefore, the challenges of drawing others in falls on this kind of a group. One way of dealing with this was through designing a systems design group, a knowledge generation group, and a field group, as putting different actors together in the research team itself. Such TDR needs funding for long-term engagement, and that's where we have our challenges at the moment. So those are the three questions we came up with. And then we have future directions, which we have some ideas about, but maybe we take them up in the discussion that comes forward.
Wonderful, thanks, Ritu. So over to you, Hallie, and the panel, please.
So I'd like to introduce our panel. I'm not going to go into, for sake of time, the individual names and affiliations of all our brilliant young participants on our panel, but their names and affiliations are here, and all of them played integral parts in our collaborative research in Mexico and India, and often taking leadership roles, and have also drawn on their own individual research as PhD students. And they're going to be commenting on themes related to the three questions that Ritu outlined for us. So I think I'll just, without further ado, turn over to Beatriz and have her comment, perhaps because all of these transdisciplinary projects that all of our panelists have been involved in, we have seen this focus on narratives and problem framing, which we know can serve to include or exclude individuals, different groups, and even problems and solutions from being considered. So Beatriz, do you want to comment on how you saw those issues of narratives play out in peri-urban spaces in Xochimilco in Mexico, where you've been doing work on sustainable transformations?
Yes, hello everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of my findings. Well, public policy and programs define the peri-urban primarily as rural. So we can find these narratives being reinforced in institutional roles and responsibilities by the different actors that we can find in these places. As places of fast urbanization, the peri-urban is rather a mosaic of contested landscapes that fall through the definitions of what is urban. Research can therefore make visible the dynamics, the practices, and the knowledge necessary for more sustainable urbanization. What I found in my research in a peri-urban community in Mexico City, in Xochimilco, where we have these man-made islands from pre-Hispanic populations, the public policy and planning is geared towards small rural communities, which reflects why public services that are provided, for example, waste management and space planning, for example, roads and sidewalks, are poorly equipped for the local dynamics. With faster urbanization, waste composition shifts from agricultural to urban, requiring different infrastructure as a majority of waste can no longer be composted or treated locally. The landscape is quickly being crowded by houses, commercial activities, and roads, filled with people that migrate looking for affordable housing or for a piece of land to farm or an opportunity to establish a business. And this changes the daily life and hinders public peace. So if we characterize the peri-urban as fluid, dynamic spaces, instead of rural or a continuum from rural to urban, then we can help visualize all the different pathways that we can find through local knowledges and local practices that can lead to sustainable urbanization built from the ground up.
Great, thanks, Beatriz. And I think in many of the projects, we've seen this challenge of what these spaces really are and trying to understand how they need to be understood and far more dynamic, far more political, far more contested than they often are categorized in public policy or narratives. So Sayan, do you want to comment on how in these dynamic spaces you've seen examples of these alternative narratives providing solutions trajectories or solution pathways that may or may not be recognized by public authorities. And I know you've been doing work on the outskirts of Delhi in this regard.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Hallie. Hi, everybody. Sure. Our research actually shows that more than the common narrative of only exploitation and exclusion, what we see in the peri-urban area is a complex configuration of complementarities and contestations, which give rise to exclusion, no doubt, but also opportunities and innovations. For instance, Ghaziabad, where we have worked as part of ISPA, ASRC, and British Academy funded projects, is a rapidly urbanizing space near Delhi, which is the capital of India. And as part of this urbanization process, several industries have come up along the river Hindon in the last 25 years, which have had a very deleterious effect on the water quality. The water table has gone down, which has negatively affected the agricultural practices in this particular region. So what we found in one of our study sites in Kahira village, like facing these challenges, the villagers, one, they shifted from water intensive agricultural practices like paddy cultivation to growing spinach. And secondly, this came up with this ingenious solution of recycling domestic wastewater and drain water for irrigation purposes. So being fresh and locally available, this then therefore added value to this perishable products, which found a growing demand in the nearby city centers. And also because transportation cost was cut down, the food was also available at a cheaper rate, which was affordable to the poorer consumers. And also profitable to the farmers because it was growing throughout the year. But like as with many of the peri-urban issues, these too had a flip side in terms of, because this is done with untreated wastewater, there's a risk of contamination to the farmers who are exposed during work and to the urban consumers who are exposed through food. So if the government actually recognized these alternative practices, these innovations, and supported it through, say, proper treatment of sewage, it could have addressed many of the problems that people face in the peri-urban areas. For instance, food security, livelihood issues, waste management concerns, and so on. But in urban planning, we rarely see this being picked up or being incorporated at all. So I think as researchers, it's important for us to look at the peri-urban situation in all its complexities, to look at people in these areas, not just as vulnerable subjects, but as active agents who are constantly negotiating with their changing surroundings and charting their own alternative paths to sustainability. I think as researchers, we need to highlight these and connect it with the planning and policymaking processes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, I think in many of these projects that you all have been involved in, we've seen how there is a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, but it also implies different responsibilities and different costs, whether it's trade-offs in terms of contamination, in this case of spinach, or whether it's about the divisions of responsibilities for addressing the problem one confronts in one's area. And so Bertha, in your experience in Xochimilco as well, where Beatriz also has worked in southern part of Mexico City, how have you seen this issue about the costs of innovation and where that cost is distributed?
Hey, yes, hi everyone. In my work in Mexico City, I explore what different actors believe to be the solution to this access to water in informal areas. So I found that public actors such as local governments benefit from this informal relationship, and those living in conditions of informality, they have internalized the cost and the burden of this management, the risk and the lack of services. It seems that all of the actors are living in a limbo of agreement around the access to public services. In a hybrid area that we call informal, unregulated, or unplanned. So one of the prominent narratives was something that I call enhancing informality, which was the way that both people who live in these so-called informal areas have internalized this informality such that they do not have any expectation about the public services, and instead they are paying an extra share for water because they are living in informality. So, for example, they spend time to search the water, and also they are buying water from private trucks. So they have, in a sense, internalized the idea that they are not citizens of the city. So instead, they see themselves as a customer of an unreliable ad hoc supply through water trucks. The solution then becomes not get rid of these unjust circumstances, but rather the petition to the public sector is to enhance it. That means that the people are asking for the number of water trucks. So instead they receive once a week, they want twice a week. So in some, residents are trapped in this poverty, marginalized condition by a narrative that release the city from the responsibility of these public services, but also because the people they have bought into. Finally, well, it is clear that given the expectation of urbanization in the global south, it is important to think about how this informality fits into the urban governance. To what extent should communities and individuals accept these governance burdens in terms, for example, of human right to the water and also the right to the city, and how these cities can transit to more sustainable urbanization under these conditions.
Great, thank you so much. Clearly, there's significant injustices and conditions of conflict, as well as a lot of creativity and innovation. And maybe Pritpal, could you comment on the successes in the projects that you've been involved in building alliances across some of these divisions, formal, informal, and public policy and local communities, and how does that create opportunities for innovation and problem solving?
Sure, Hallie. Hello, everyone. So I would like to share a few learnings on partnership and alliance building around the issue of formality and informality from a project basically that focused on the issue of urban waste management. And we use the perspective of environmental and social justice in this project. So the partnership in the project was the key thing, and some of the important partner in the projects were, of course, Step Center was there, and then Jawaharlal Nehru University was an important partner. Then there were a few NGOs like Toxics Link and Waste Picker Organization who were also part of the project. So, and what I think is that, the relationship between these project partners was very important. And some of this relationship goes beyond the Steps projects, basically. Individuals had relationship with some of the partners, and which played a very important role, not just in conducting the research smoothly, but also this relationship was instrumental in building an alliance, which thereby, helped in building an alternative pathways for urban waste management. So for instance, it led us to make a very positive impact, which Hallie, you were talking about. And one of the positive impact was that one of our project partner, Toxics Link, they were one of their member was a part of the committee who was reviewing the urban waste management, basically regulations in the country. So by the end of that review, we found that a lot of the insights from our projects were incorporated in that. So that was one, certainly positive impact. The second I would like to share was that at the level of practice, a new model of cooperation between the formal private sector and the informal sector started taking a shape. For instance, they signed like a private company and our project partner, one of the Waste Pickers Association, they signed a contract to do segregation in some part of Delhi. There was another example of a project Waste Picker Association who started, in getting involved in establishing decentralized composting facilities across the city. So in the end, I would just like to say that, this project basically provided many lessons for the role of, transdisciplinary research in urban sustainability transformation. And it also illustrated that how, Steps pathway approach can be applied in the mode of scholar activists to empower marginalized actors.
Thank you. I think that raises a really important issue about the social relationships and the political relationships that are integral to this type of research and how these can facilitate these positive impacts. But we also know that this doesn't just come out of nowhere. There's deep processes of engagement and practices and methods, as well as technologies that have been experimented on in these projects to facilitate engagement. And John and Uma, perhaps you could comment on some of these tools and approaches that have been so successful. So Uma, what has been your experience with some of the participatory engagement methods in the work that you've been involved in?
Hi, thanks, Haley. Hi, everybody. So for our work in Gurgaon, we essentially, like Ritu ma'am was saying, we worked in the urban water space. So our approach to transformation in Gurgaon has been guided by an understanding that it has to be a process of quite long duration, and with dealing with dynamic systems, also working at multiple scales. So the methods we tailored a bit, like in the pathways approach, were actually designed, or like we tried to experiment with them. We try to kind of understand, like deepen our understanding of the problem space using the methods like citizen science, structured methods like T-labs. So in the initial period of the project, we used a structured method, which is, I think people who are aware of the pathways approach know about it, called the T-lab, which gave us a bird's eye view of how people at different communities, people of all classes, were actually understanding the problem or the challenge of urban water. So it helped us gain an understanding of where the problem lies, how people view the problem. And that formed the bedrock of our citizen science methods, like the more unstructured or semi-structured methods. For that, we had two kinds of activities, actually, the citizen science method. The first one was water testing, which we did in the low-income communities. And the other was frequency mapping of like waterlogging events. While the structured method kind of gave us a bird's eye view, this led to like understanding at a more granular level in terms of like, how do people living in those spaces experience water in those spaces? How did they view it? And how could we help them in reframing the challenges that they see around water in the process, kind of co-producing knowledge and helping that to like design solutions based for them. So we saw that people would come out, it led to the emergence of like affective accounts around water. And we realized that people can articulate their problems better when we use these methods, these participatory methods. People could articulate that this is the problem. For our engagement, particularly, we would rely actually on radio programs and having Jal Chaupals in these various communities, where we would go and try to ask people like, or have meetings with them regularly, like once a month. So it was a very intensive engagement that we had. And in the process, what we realized was that this helped us in broadening out the concerns and like opening up to people to help us negotiate the field better. And we could reframe the challenge, which was essentially Gurgaon is a semi-arid area. So from a scarcity-based narrative to going to water quality concerns and its associated effects on health. So basically, what we aim to do using these transdisciplinary methods was to strengthen community capacity so that practical solutions can come out of these communities. And that is what we have been like, that provided the momentum for our current project, where we are actually experimenting with decentralized solutions, co-designing it with the low-income communities and trying to reframe the challenge, like narrative in the water sector in urban areas, that you only need large-scale solutions. Whereas what we are trying to demonstrate is you can use decentralized solutions to actually make the waterscape more equitable in nature.
Great. I mean, it's such an intensive and engaged person-to-person process. So John, I think you have an interesting insight in the use of technology as kind of a boundary object, in a sense, to facilitate that kind of engagement. Do you want to give us some insights from your experience?
Yeah, so most recently, I've been involved with a British Academy funded project, which is led by Fiona Marshall at SPRU. And was in collaboration with a team at the informatics department at Sussex, and also with STEP's colleagues at JNU in Delhi, some of whom we've already heard from, and also with Zhongnan University of Economics and Law in Wuhan. And one key part of this project was building a web app that uses a combination of machine learning and human interpretation to create city region maps of land use change. So we took satellite imagery and analyzed it based on insights from the field which in turn helped to guide further fieldwork to understand the implications of particular land use changes in urban and peri-urban areas of Wuhan and in Ghaziabad. And as well as the city region scale maps, we also created maps at the scale of the municipal planning zones in Ghaziabad district. And so by digitizing master plans and overlaying them with the classified land use in the web app, we could show the contrast between planned formal land use and informal land use in master plan areas. And we've begun to see the potential to use this type of mapping tool in Ghaziabad and potentially other peri-urban contexts to democratize city region planning processes by using it as a boundary object to support the involvement of stakeholders in planning discussions, but also to facilitate alliance building among community groups and activists and NGOs that may be operating at different levels across the district or city region. So we think it could help planners and activists and community members to share knowledge and also to recognize the wider context of change in which their own livelihoods are situated. And this could then open doors to discussions about possible alternative future trajectories of peri-urban development. In the future, this web app is continuing to be developed, and potentially we think it could be used to model alternative future scenarios to demonstrate impacts on aspects of well-being, food security, and environmental outcomes. So I think that this kind of spatial mapping can play a useful role in understanding peri-urban dynamics, but also in legitimizing alternative framings that might challenge the dominant narratives. But it needs to be done as part of a grounded process of fieldwork and engagement with peri-urban residents and other stakeholders. Otherwise, it just becomes an exercise in top-down analysis, but without this extra fine-grained detail that the fieldwork provides.
It's just so exciting to see that kind of work being used in a very socially embedded and engaged process. And this raises some interesting questions about what are the challenges for doing this kind of work from position of academia as PhD students, as students involved in these projects. And I just wonder if we might get some final thoughts about the role of the university and academia in these challenges from Pritpal. Maybe you can start. And I would encourage anyone from the audience who has been doing this work in universities to also just add your thoughts to the discussion in the chat, because it would be very useful for us to get insights from other people's experiences. Pritpal?
Yeah, thanks, Hallie. Yeah, I would like to share basically 3 points on this issue. The first one is, like I worked on various series of steps project between starting from 2008 till 2017. And in most of these projects, basically, we had a very healthy partnership with the university alongside, with NGOs and community-based organization. And let me tell you frankly that except for a few, like barring few exceptions, most of these partnerships were fruitful and successful. And in the case of partnership with the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, it took the shape of, what is called today as a transdisciplinary research cluster for sustainability studies. It was constituted in 2016. And this cluster is now actively involved in a series of research projects and making all kinds of intervention on urban sustainability issues. So that's the first point. Second is, as a STEP center, because the STEP center is also located in the university, and STEP center provided not just funding, but also leadership to most of the projects in which I was involved. And most of the people I have worked with STEP center, like I mostly worked with Fiona, but I also worked with many other people in STEP center. I have found that they were very collegial. They've always been open to ideas from the university, other partners and other universities. There have been occasions where there have been contestations and debates and discussions, but again, those contestations and debates were reworked and reworked in a constructive manner, basically. So and what I've found is that unlike any other funding agency, STEP Center has always collaborated with an open mind and been very sensitive to the local context. And my final point is, what I've realized with regard to transdisciplinary research and partnership with the university. I think university partnership is very important for the other partners who are involved in the research. It provides basically, for instance, the example which I was giving with regard to my previous answer about the Waste Picker Association. So they found basically those kind of associations, they found legitimacy from the university research, sorry. But on the other hand, what I have also experienced is that, again, barring few exceptions, that most of the academics located in the universities are not very enthusiastic about the politics of transformation. They definitely, draw a lot of insights from the ground and are happy as long as those insights are useful in building theory and writing paper. But they are not, very active in terms of, they're not, in terms of playing an active role in the politics of transformation on the ground, they're not very enthusiastic about it. So these are the 3 points I wanted to make, Hallie. Thanks.
Bertha, do you want to add your thoughts about doing this type of work in Mexico City?
Yes, thank you. I would like a little brief about this. I learned that there are ways to achieve this transdisciplinary research, such as facilitating this communication, producing knowledge, and decision-making by consensus. I have this experience working in a transdisciplinary project about social hydrological risks that you can find information in the chat. So we use in these participatory tools and combination with this boundary object. So we can use these participatory tools that includes stakeholders in defining the problems and strategy for example, a situation like resource management, urban planning, etc. So this also the use of this boundary object can be useful, as already my colleagues mentioned, as the case, for example, in this project that the name is Megadab project. We use this modeling platform to integrate different vision about Mexico City water system, including problems, belief, interest, and responsibility of different stakeholders. And at the same time, this platform helped to create a space for discussion among these different actors, to identify possible alternatives and strategy for addressing these socio-hydrological risks. So these are very helpful, but also working with the stakeholders is important not only for the validation of the research, or in this case of the model, but also because it creates confidence in the results. And most importantly, I think it's because generates trust and willingness for collaboration. I just want to brief in example in the Megadab project, we validate this model by developing a role-played game that we play this with residents, academics, and politicians in Mexico City, and which in addition to validate this Megadab model, this help to participants understand the intention of the model, as well as the implication of how decisions are made over geographic space. So I think TDR can transform the way that we analyze and conceptualize these wicked problems now. So researchers, university, and practitioners have this huge challenge, and also the opportunity for spread the seed about this TDR thinking to break these disciplinary boundaries for more collaborative research. Thanks.
Thank you, Bertha. I think that's all we're going to have time for, unfortunately. I really appreciate all of you participating. Fiona, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think we're going to get whizzed off in a few moments, actually, but huge thanks for everybody's participation, and particularly the fantastic panelists. And it's very much part of an ongoing journey, end of steps, but an ongoing network, I think, across the global consortium and beyond on transformations to sustainability. And we've been thinking about what various ways in which we can keep this network going, and particularly in terms of sort of comparing experiences and sharing methodologies and the like across these very different settings.